Today we're going to talk about the nervous system, and there'll be two parts to this presentation. The first part has to do with the basic characteristics of neurons and support cells, and some details about the central nervous system. Part 2 deals with characteristics of the peripheral nervous system. Thank you.
Nervous tissue, Part 1. On Part 1, we want to describe the components of the neuron. We want to distinguish between neurons and glia cells, or support cells. We want to identify the components of meninges, gray and white matter. Part 2 will be part of the peripheral nervous system. Now there's 4 basic types of tissue of the body. We have epithelium, which covers the outside of the body and it produces glands. We have connective tissue that supports the support tissue of the body. We have muscle tissue for contraction and movement of the body. And we have a nervous tissue for communication of the body. Now nerve is like epithelium in that it comes from ectoderm, kind of like the epidermis of skin. Here we see an epithelial cell, and it's polarized at the base, and there's an apex. Similarly, a nerve cell has dendrites on the cell body, and it has a projection or as an axon, similar to epithelium. However, it does not make the junctional complex as the epithelium does, but it does make synapses between adjacent cells. Now, the nervous tissue is specialized for transmission, reception, and integration of electrical signals. And here you can see the vast network of nervous tissue throughout the body, for the spinal cord and brain, as well as the peripheral nerves. Neurons are very large excitable cells with long processes of axons and dendrites. The axons make contact with other neurons or muscle cells at specialized locations called a synapse, where impulses of electrical or chemical transmission from one neuron to another neuron or to a target cell. Other neurons secrete hormones. Now, nervous tissue is the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. There's individual peripheral nerves that are found throughout the body. Individual neurons and clusters of neurons are called ganglia. So ganglia is a cluster of neurons. Here's a neuron cell body here. There's a nucleus, nissal substance. There's another nucleus, cell body. These are satellite cells or support cells in the ganglia, which are located in the peripheral nerves. Now, the function of the nervous system is communication, and it depends upon special signaling properties of the neurons. And also it depends upon the long processes, some of which may be a meter. They reach from the spinal cord to your big toe, for example. Now, characteristics of neurons, one is they're irritable. The protoplasm can react to various physical and chemical agents, so they're irritable. Also, they have connectivity. That is, they can conduct from one location to another location to bring sensory information in or motor information out from the central nervous system to the muscle. Now, what are some activities of the nervous system? One, it receives. It has an afferent pathway. It receives signals, receptors, taste buds, for example. Receives sector part of the afferent. It also has processing capabilities. Centralization is paramount. That is, you feel something hot, it goes back to the central nervous system, and then it pops out and you move your hand. So centralization is important. It processes the information. And it transmits. You have an efferent. So something's hot, something calculates, and then something tells it to move your hand. It transmits too. There's a voluntary or conscious one, somatic. Those are what we use when we move our muscles. There's also an involuntary one, or autonomic. An autonomic could be sympathetic, or it could be parasympathetic. Sympathetic is fight or flight, If you see a bear, the sympathetic is going to take over. However, if you don't see a bear, the parasympathetic will take over. Vegetative, it will digest your food that's going on. So we have the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which is all other neuron cell bodies and axons and dendrites that are located outside the central nervous system. In the brain, we have the white matter. The white matter is in the center, and that's where you have the somas, or the neurons, neuron cell bodies located. And then you have the gray matter. Gray matter is on the outside of the brain, and it's where you have myelinated and unmyelinated axon. The myelization in the central nervous system is the oligodendrocytes, as opposed to the swan cells in the peripheral nervous systems. Oligodendrites are the cells that causes myelization, and here we see a myelin around this axon here. Also, there's support cells, astrocytes and microglia. The microglia is part of the blood-brain barrier. And then the peripheral nervous system, you have nerves, sensory ganglion, autonomic ganglia, the plexus, and swan cells. The swan cells are the support cells, myelin-producing glia cells of the peripheral nervous system. So with the central nervous system, you got the cerebellum column, a spinal column, and you also have peripheral nervous system. You got cranial nerves, spinal nerves, and then you have ganglia located on the outside. So central nervous system, a spinal cord and brain, and then all the others is the peripheral nervous system. Here we see a neuron in the central nervous system interacting with the peripheral nervous system, and we have synapses between the post and the presynaptic complex, where one tells another cell what to do, and it may synapse on the axon, it may synapse on the dendrites typically, or it may synapse on the cell body itself. So in the brain, we have the white matter on the inside, and that's where we have the cell bodies. And here we see the nucleus, nucleolus, and the cytoplasm of the cell body. On the outside, in through here is the gray matter, where you have the neural peel. The neural peel is actually the connections. It's the space between the cell bodies themselves, where you have interaction with the axon, the dendrites, as we'll see in a minute. Neuroglia, support cells we'll see, and then see these are the neuron cell bodies themselves. So again, we have the white matter in the center of the brain, and the gray matter is on the periphery in through here, as we can see here and here. The neurophil is in through here and through there. And what that is a felt work of a complex and highly organized meshwork of dendrites, axonal, and glial processes. So it's processes of these whose entanglements, interaction with each other, interface with each other, facilitates an ordered activity important for communication function of the nervous system. So by entangling these things, you have communication. It's a network for communication to occur. The neuropil provides numerous regions for synaptic contact and functional interaction among nerve cells in between individual nerve cells. Then we have the fibrous astrocytes. These are the glia cells, the support cells, and you can see their projections with special stain. Now, the intermediate filaments are not conserved during evolution, unlike tubular and actin, which are highly conserved. Intermediate filaments not. So therefore, the different cell types of the body have different intermediate filaments. And keratin is one that's in epithelium. Desmin is in muscle. Vermentin is in mesenchymal cells. And then you have a class of neurofilaments, intermediate filaments. And neurofilaments are in the axons and dendrites. And also you have a glial filaments in the astrocytes that we see. And in fact, one way of detecting the type of cancer you have, like, is what's the origin of the cell that is now cancerous, is by using immunofluorescence. That is, you have antibodies that are against proteins, these intermediate filaments of different types, and depend upon which type you have, keratin, vimentin, whatever, that indicates where you got a muscle cell tumor or you have a tumor of epithelium. Or you can see if you have a tumor of astrocytes. For example, intermediate filament GFAP, which is gliofilamenary acid proteins, filament, an intermediate filament that's used clinically to identify astrocytes to diagnose classes of tumor, as in astrocytoma. And so you use intermediate filaments specific for the astrocytes to indicate whether or not you have a tumor of the astrocytes, if that's the source of your tumor. Now, in the spinal cord, it has different covers. It has the dura mater, the main covering on the outside, and you have a subdural space in between there and the carotenoid, and the subcarotenoid space, and then you can see where you have the spinal nerves coming out through there. It says anterior root, posterior root coming out from the spinal cord itself. The gray matter is actually on the inside of the spinal cord, and the white matter is on the outside. The gray matter is where you have the cell bodies inside there, and the white matter is where you have interactions. And the central canal is lined by ependymal cells, and these ependymal cells have microvilli, most cells do, and cilia, and they produce the cerebral spinal fluid that surrounds the brain and spinal cord and acts as a cushion. It protects the brain and spinal from injury. This fluid is clear normally, but also the pressure of the fluid is important and may be associated with severe headaches if you have low fluid pressure. So here we see the spinal cord. Here you see the vertebrae, the bones themselves, but there's the spinal cords and then some spinal nerves that are coming out through there. So we have the ventral horn, the motor horn, or the sensory and the dorsal horn through there. Glia cells support these cells, and you have the motor neuron in the ventral horn that you see. And the initial substance is the ribosomes and the rough endoplasmic reticulum that we have in producing proteins in the cell. Here we see initial substance is the rough endoplasmic reticulum and the free ribosomes, polyribosomes or polysomes for short. And here we can see them. There's the polysomes, and then this is the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Here's the nucleus and the nucleolus of this cell, and you can see these groups of cells, which are the initial substance that we can see, the dark staining regions within the cytoplasm. There's a nucleus, two nuclei, another nucleolus, and there two nucleoli, I should say. One nucleus, two nucleoli, one nucleolus, and initial substance that we see there. And so here we can see again the gray matter in the center and the white matter on the side. And here we see axonal tracts coming through there, and you can see these lines going through here as axonal tracts. Axons are surrounded. Here we see the axons that are surrounded by the myelin sheath, and the myelin sheath is kind of somewhat been removed from these. But here we can see the white matter and the gray matter and spinal nerves. So if we look at these, we can see the dura mater right on the outside next to the bone and the subdural space, and then your carotenoid matter, as you see right in through there, subcarotenoid space, spinal nerves, and then the pia mater. The pia mater is right around touching the spinal cord itself. Again, the dura mater, subdural space, carotenoid mater, and then spinal nerves, and then the subcarotenoid space, as you can see there. Again, we can see these are ganglion. This is ganglion cells. You see these are cell bodies and satellite cells around these. These are axons here with the myelin sheath that's kind of been washed away. And here we can see the dorsal root ganglia. And dorsal root ganglia is a bipolar neuron. That is, it looks like it's got two ends to it, bipolar. And so it interacts with a spinal cord here and a skin over there. And so there's no synapse in there because it has two ends. It's bipolar in the dorsal root. And also it is sensory. So it's sensing the skin, the pressure, whatever. In one end of the bipolar, there's a ganglion cell nucleus right there, and then the other end of the bipolar goes into the spinal column. So what we've been talking about basically is a central nervous system. We have the peripheral, we have the brain and the spinal column, and there's nerves and a support neuroglia that's associated with it. That's it.